Okay. For today, I thought, not really getting into, I'll talk about some of the work that we're doing at the University of Pretoria, but I wanted to, this is more towards these kind of call to action talks. So the way we should look at it is I think that also the African NLP community seems to be also at a point in time. And it seems we sometimes have to first reflect at it and then see where we're going to actually move forward. So on one part, I've never been an activist for indigenous languages, but working in this area kind of forces you to start thinking about language, in more than just tokens. And we're building all these models out there, we're training another word embedding, or we're training another language model. But what it tends to be is that there's these intersections of part of who we are and what language actually means. So I did this kind of a slide. This is looking at 2019 actually being the year of the indigenous language. And it's very important for us to see this because there is one part of saying, yes, we do a lot of our work in English. And it's great because we're trying to push the limits of what machines can actually understand. And we're also trying to understand our intelligence through getting machines to understand, right? Because we're also trying to model ourselves in this whole process. But NLP is a broad church, right? So I think the people who are here in this room most likely will be coming from very similar spaces. And what I also want us to think about is that we do actually have other people who are thinking about shaping intelligence or understanding intelligence that we can actually bring into this world. And maybe that's a way for the African NLP community to also find ways to give back and also find very interesting problems. So we do have these wicked problems and challenges that are across. Sure, low resource languages is one of those things, or building up indigenous languages is also one of those things, but we also can come up with interesting innovations that can really help us in understanding a couple of things. So I gave this last year at Black in AI. I talked a little bit about this, but I thought I really should bring it here as an indication of the impact of where we get our data from as NLP researchers. So if you go back to 2009, I just started as a PhD student at Rutgers in New Jersey, and I was homesick, very, very homesick. So my wife was still staying in South Africa. We hadn't gotten married. One of the things or facts that you should know about Fulbright scholars is a lot of them get married just after they got their scholarship. It's very funny. And so you have to make life decisions and then things happen on that part. So my wife was still in South Africa. We're waiting to get married. So in the end of 2009, before heading home, I then get to this thing, I'm homesick, so hey, let me just start editing Wikipedia, right? So what can I do? What is the thing that I can actually go and contribute? I go to Harangua, that's where I was born. And Harangua is a township in South Africa that currently is in the city of Tshwane municipality, but even in 2009, it was in the city of Tshwane municipality, which is in the Gauteng province. But back in the day, it actually used to be part of a Bantustan, and then became part of the Northwest, but then quickly transferred to Gauteng. So now that's already problem number one. Harangua Northwest is actually not true. In that part, and I didn't understand. It's you have all this content that's on Wikipedia, and a lot of it seems to actually be inaccurate on that part. So what's actually going on? What can I do? I don't have the information. If you look at cities and towns, you see their Wikipedia pages are very long. So what I did was I just spent time just putting all the, just the scaffolding. So I would just go in, put in scaffolding, that there has to be a map here, there has to be long lat GPS locations, and then specific sections on that part. So then you go to 2019, and that's how it looks like. People have come in afterwards and actually done the work and built up on that scaffolding, right? And now you have a lot of information and you've got maps and everything. So now in 2010, I go back to South Africa for the World Cup and to get married. And then what happens is I got married, living with my wife in downtown Pretoria. She goes to work. I'm just now PhD summaring. I'm just doing some research, working on some papers. I think was it AAA? I don't remember. It was maybe it was a NeurIPS submission. So decided to go to the library and go like, oh, I'm here. I've been editing these Wikipedia pages. Like, what can I do? I'll get some local content from the place of all these townships around Pretoria. What then happens, I go to the main library of Pretoria, go in, I ask the head librarian, can I get the Wikipedia? I'm doing this, I'm really looking for first-hand sources about information about Harankua and all the other townships that are around Tshwane, because I think it's very important. If we kind of don't record our history, it's almost like we don't exist. And coming from a country like South Africa, that actually is not by mistake, it was by design. So how do we fix some of these things? So the head librarian goes away for 10 minutes, and she comes back, and she had printed all my Wikipedia articles. Right? So now you can understand. I never thought, that was never my goal. I didn't think this, you just catch yourself like, wait, so this is the only content that you have. There's no books, there's no history books, there's anything. So we use these sources to build our models, right? And then as such, that's why you end up being activists, because it's like, wait, we need to record ourselves. And if we don't, as Africans, we need to kind of find ways. And this is some of the things that the NLP community here can actually bring, because we're trying to build models, we're trying to build tools that other people actually can use and ultimately record us in more ways than one. So that's, you can come talk to me about the Wikipedia. There's still more stuff that happens in there. And that's where then, there's a little bit then of thinking about the social sciences. I'm not a social scientist at all, but now I've started actually interacting more and more with them. And hey, how do you understand and shape intelligence is not just for the STEM kind of fields, right? Yes, we're leaving the linguists on the side for now because, hey, the deep learning revolution is here. But we're going to have to bring them in other ways and then work together. Why is this important? I think we tend to look at text, we have all these different tasks we're trying machines to get to do, but there's other ways of actually then understanding the world. So going back to 2011, in South Africa, there was a show called an edutainment show that was by the SABC and Johns Hopkins on trying to understand how HIV spreads through communities. It's called Intersections. So this is a paper from Johns Hopkins. It was very interesting because it was a graph. So the red, if you're gray, it just means you don't have HIV. If you're red, it means that likely there was an HIV infection in some way. Square means male, and then triangle is female. And then there's structure in there, and there's likely, if there's message passing, if you look at HIV as a message going around, I think you can actually see what are the highest areas of risk and that kind of stuff. So there was one way to look at this. I saw this paper, and the show was going on, and what I did was I spent part of my PhD. I was like, okay, yeah, I'm a reinforcement learning person, but I would like to spend time just procrastinating on other problems and not the PhD. So worked on then, hey, can you actually collect data from Twitter? So this is before I started I started being really interested in NLP, and in this was like, hey, can we now fetch Twitter data about this show? The show is very active and prolific online in talking and getting people to do Q&As. They did the Q&As on Facebook, they did the Q&As on Twitter, and it was very revolutionary at the time. Now thinking back, there could have been so many other things I could have done with that information, but at that time was, hey, I can do some stuff about graphs, right? You've got the graph about the show and the characters. Now how can we do a graph about how people are actually interacting with this information? And again, we're trying to embody how can we get intelligence and understand our intelligence by looking only at the message passes. So it wasn't really, it was just looking at the tokens and saying, how does this token actually move around the graph, kind of in a way. Information spread, understanding themes, societal reactions, education, and then you collect data from Twitter. And at the end, what happened is, my first foray into NLP was creating a word cloud. So created this word cloud, and then the show actually saw this word cloud. It was on my blog. I think it's still up there. And then they took it, and then they repurposed it, and it became, for the second season, all the crew actually wore this T-shirt that had, this thing. I had a blog post that was explaining, hey, here's how, what is this thing? In graphs, you think about cascades, so you're trying to identify who actually amplifies information spread on that part. So now that's where kind of it started, and it was like, okay, but that's not enough. I'm just looking at this token moving around. What actually do you do with the text that's in there? And now that's where you get into this NLP, but I think there's opportunities to bring that, there's these spaces from graph mining, from social sciences into this space. That was just, then at that time I was playing a lot with graphs and understanding. And and then you bring it back to Wikipedia, because I think we tend to talk about that, or with also the common crawl, but we have this information that's in there, and we're trying to make sense of it in the bigger scheme. So for us now, going back, like for me, looking at South African situation, that's Wikipedia, English, almost 6 million articles that are written. Afrikaans Wikipedia, that's 82,000. isiZulu, 1,000 Wikipedia articles. And then it just keeps on dropping from there. So now that goes, hey, if now that becomes our primary source, or one of the big sources that we use to actually train our models, we need to find ways to deal that the data is small. Sure, there is one part of talking to the wiki community and getting more people to write, but at the other side of it, we are here now, right? We've got the technology. We can fix some of these things that we want to do using the models that we can actually build. So that's where my kind of call to action here is that, we are better together. I would like that over the next year, leading up to wherever the next deep learning Indaba is, that we find ways to actually connect, find ways to share what we have. And on that part, one is data. I think there will be more announcements, I guess, as the day goes on when it comes to these things. What can we get from speech in a way? And I'm very appreciative to the organizers for this year for having speech and text being on this, because we have radio broadcast that's easier in some ways to get data from that. We can find other ways to actually pirate radio streams and then put them somewhere in local language, and then find ways to then go from speech to text. And then what else can we give as a community back to speech is what we have to kind of find. Practice, right? How are we then, now that I'm back in the university, how are we doing teaching? How are we finding ways to get people into here? Like for me, I'm teaching a class this semester called Defense Against the Dark Text Art. And it is very tough that I had a very short period of time to literally go from, hey, here's tokens, one hot encoding, to here's one embeddings, and here's what, go forth and solve hate speech in the next 2 months. And but it was very thrilling, and you had to think about these things and how do we help each other actually create some of this content that we can actually then give to other people to support them. And there's many commercial uses of NLP in industry, and then how does that also contribute to our practice quality? With the Indaba, if you went up and saw all the posters, people are sharing what they're doing, and we should continue this in a scale, trying to increase it. Why is that? One, you get to know who else is actually working on problems that are very interesting to you. Two, you can also find opportunities that you can point to things that you can help. For example, at the AI4D award ceremony on Tuesday night, there's a group in Nigeria that's trying to do OCR on bills that are going through their parliament, and then from there trying to figure out if they can extract specific entities that are useful, right? For some of us, I'm from South Africa, our parliament, it's for a long time, it's nice, the PDFs are up there, and the text the biggest thing you have to deal with is the Python PDF to text library that, sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work as well, but they do not have that, all it is that now they're going to go scan them and have to do OCR, but there's actually tasks that they're trying to do that, that actually I think we could then contribute to helping them either doing topic modeling in a much more interesting way, identifying entities that might be very useful for West Africa, not necessarily Sub-Saharan Africa in a specific way, and hey, maybe we can transfer that across other West African countries and then build models that then work across doing bill extraction in a way that gets us to understand that. So that just sharing and being and seeing that presentation now was to connect, I was able to connect with the team, going like, oh, I'm doing kind of something very similar in South Africa, but looking at the judicial system over the last 20 years in South Africa. And when you look at the judicial system, the top courts, yeah, PDFs, text inside the lowest courts, there's just papers sitting somewhere. Right, so then you need to figure out how are those things going to be scanned, how then do we extract entities from all this text, and then how do we then build on these other state-of-the-art models in such a way that we can then build the next applications on top of that. Yeah, and because of this year's Deep Learning Indaba and Sauti Yetu being kind of our call, we actually held an unconference last week, right, as a build-up to this. It was just impromptu, organized on Twitter, and then we actually ended up having a physical and online meeting. This was just the people who were at the physical meeting, but then people were able to join in also remotely and have discussions, break up into smaller groups, machine translation, social media, language identification, coming back and talking about resources. And I hope we are, okay, I deleted the link, but I'll try to I'll put that back up. But we're hoping to have another one in 6 months, and we're trying to find people to come in, and people also are putting up their profiles and what they're working on so that we can actually encourage those collisions. And there is still a discussion right now about how we're moving forward. Do we create another mailing list, or do we kind of create a discourse in a way that we can actually then share what's actually going on? And the other reason like this is that we have to find innovative ways to actually deal, especially with things like data. I gave the example of radio and speech, but you find, especially with entertainment, that there actually is either text that's written in local languages. It's either behind copyright, depending on where you are, in which countries. On the African continent, it might not be transcribed that well, but we can try and figure out how to actually fill in kind of those gaps in there. So yeah, we need to do more work in this area. We need to release more sample data sets, because then allows that when you're writing your papers, sure, you can have the big data sets, but then you can also then go in and slip in more localized data sets, and other people then are encouraged to actually try and do something there, share work, teach, do some interdisciplinary work, host NLP competitions, and let's figure out ways to innovate. The last things on my side were just some of the work I've been doing over the last year or so. So some work with Sapisho here. We've been trying to look at, hey, how do you now increase the amount of, do data augmentation to increase the amount of data that you have to actually do training for different tasks. And in the, some of the ways that it's done, especially with English, is that you have different options, but we're trying to move towards actually using language models and word vectors that if you can actually get a good chunk of data, word embeddings, you get a good chunk of data, build your embedding models, and then actually be able to do augmentation for your tasks and increase your data sets and actually come up with classifiers or other task performance that's actually good. So we now have finished a draft of a paper that's looking at some of this and trying to look at what the effects are in English, but then we're trying to then do the same thing for Sepedi in South Africa to see how well these type of embedding models will work, and we're going towards kind of language models, and we'll look at some of the other state-of-the-art like multitask learning, where you're trying to now do augmentation. You can do it globally, where you don't care really about the context of the word, but you know that the context of the word is actually going to give you a boost. So now doing more localized embeddings, and yeah, you can go check the papers on arXiv if you want to see what we've done on there. With Avaslin, my master's student, who had a poster yesterday. Here we're trying to understand the South African election through both the lens of traditional media. So we have a news service in South Africa that gave us all their data from 2014 and 2019, and then at the same time, we got then ethical clearance to look at 2019 Twitter data, and we're trying to understand what actually happens between the media, political parties, and the public, and how does that interplay actually work. So using here NLP as a way to actually then understand society. Kind of in a way. So then you're going to kind of then do topic modeling. You're going to look at some other models to extract entities in there. So this is just like, one of the things that was very interesting is that you see for us, you would think, yeah, sure, there's 2 different presidential candidates in 2 years, so you expect that those are going to be the large tokens. But then also in the 2 different, 2014 and 2019, the public protectors of the countries actually showed up separately, kind of in a way. So being able to do that, sure, we would say like, oh, but people, we should think that, but now you can actually show it and then actually record it in a good way. And we then also can then do topic modeling and then try to identify these. So now we're almost going to be looking at these, trying to almost do causal effects. Yeah, I'm almost done on that part. And yeah, and then even doing social media NLP research, it's more than just text, it is more than just graphs. I used to just look at social media as graphs. Now I look at it both as a natural language and graphs, and then you have to bring in the social sciences. If we're going to then do things like trying to look at causal effect, in that part you then need to talk there, like the language in social science, how you actually model that and look at the best practice. And yeah, I'll leave that and then just, try to end right now. So, thanks. Yeah.
Social media data, image data that they can find, like, can you recommend to people some best practices in terms of where they can have the most impact?
Sure. So when it comes to data, alternative sources, so we all tend to think like, oh, social media, yeah, it's easy to grab data, but maybe doing, like, having models that are multilingual might be a little bit better. It's just that, but you should also think about the studies that you could actually do with it. So my perfect project that I keep on telling people that I would do if I had like a lot of time and not the responsibilities that I have right now is to look at meme evolution geographically across the continent, right? Because again, this could tell us something about how the different cultures actually. So you look at tech, you look at all the social media posts over a period of time, you see a meme pop up, it becomes the new word token because people stop using phrases and then you're just now putting up the image as a thing. But what that image actually means across cultures is different. And can you identify that? And can you quantify it? And can that also get you to understand what the society's values are because of the way that they actually do that? The other one is that you might find that in your country, your broadcast corporation, if it's a national one, they might have transcripts for news, for all the news, especially on radio. And if you can find this, these could most likely be in local languages. And if those actually were released, like, then can think about, like, that Wikipedia limit becomes less of an issue. All right, because if you go back to whatever, yes, some of it is going to be literally just printed paper, and that's where the OCR plus text people actually come in on bringing that. But then once we can actually collect these, find ways to release them, then they become kind of archived and then can be used by other people.
Graduates about looking at failed bank transaction and how it's affecting financial inclusion in Nigeria.
Yeah.
So when I look at the data, I realize that the people I really want to address about failed bank transaction, I want to know.
So that's the other thing about, so the fun thing about looking at social media and then putting geo information is that you just recreate the population density map about likely where people have the most money in a country. So that's the thing with social media that you have to be careful about. Don't try to, think that, oh, this is going to be representative of my country. It'll be representative of specific areas on there. But if you're then trying to look at, hey, I'm looking at marginalized people in my country and you have to find other ways on that. And that's where sometimes I find the social scientists become much more interesting because you might find that there's organizations that run surveys for other things in there, and you could partner and say, we're also then trying to look at this, and it also then adds to better understanding of a population. And then when they're there, they do like recordings, the studies are very different to the way that we tend to to normally do. And what you'll find is that they're more interested in getting help from you because you can process things computationally. They have to go through everything by hand in the part. So when we bring these two, we can actually get some. It's still...